Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. I pay particular tribute and memory to the Indigenous owners of the land, the Noongar Nation, and to the many thousands of people who have been affected by or died by asbestos. I've been in a rather reflective mood this year, apart from the fact of turning 80, which makes me reflective. But I wrote a book about an uncle of mine who was a young Australian who ended up in the French Resistance and was guillotined 80 years ago this year. And it has been a very reflective time for me thinking about the past. And, excuse me, when I was invited to give this short address, I promise you. When I was invited to give the address, I just reflected a bit about my own past and its relationship with asbestos. And I can tell you that I was a young university student, very short of money, and had no chance of getting a job on the wheat bins because of a late exam. And I had two choices, a sliding doors moment, really. I could have gone to a place called Wittenoom to mine up there, or I could have gone to a place called Sons of Gawlia to mine out there. And I knew nothing about either of those operations, except someone told me that at Wittenoom you had to stoop because the working conditions were in very low areas. And so, mindful of not wanting to stoop, I went to Sons of Gawlia, which was an incredible sliding moment, and I might well have suffered the same things that so many other people have suffered in the context of asbestos. I also worked in the mid-1970s for the Aboriginal Legal Service in the Pilbara and Kimberley and met very many Ngarluma, Yindjibarndi, Awonga, Banjima, members of the community who were suffering from a whole range of diseases brought upon by, firstly, the terrible events of the atomic bomb explosion in the Montebellos, where their community rights and interests and health were simply disregarded. And then, of course, for those who were in the asbestos areas, and particularly in the asbestos delivery activities, taking it through to Point Sampson for shipping, because so many of those people not only were involved in the movement of the asbestos, but they used at times the bags that were surplus to requirement as bedding equipment in the Aboriginal reserves where there were very limited resources. So in the 1970s, I came across this very large who had serious diseases, some of which had gone untreated and very many of which resulted in death. And when I came back from the north, enthused about going into Parliament, I met a very decent, good Labor man, Frank Konechny, who I think was Mayor of Kwinana at that time. And Frank had been an intellectual in Austria who came out to Australia, and he and his wife settled here post-war after an horrific war experience, and the Department of Immigration sent him to Wittenoom to work in the underground mines, and he had contracted mesothelioma and subsequently passed away. And it was through Frank's recommendations that I got to meet Robert Fajakovic and his community organisation. And ever since that time, I'm particularly aware of what a fantastic job the Asbestos Diseases Society has done in terms of changing our community attitudes towards not only this terrible product, but also to other products, as we heard earlier today, this idea of the artificial stone for kitchens. And the history of asbestos and asbestosis and mesothelioma is really shocking. It is truly one of the most shocking histories of occupational risk that you could imagine. In 1920, asbestosis was clearly identified as a serious risk to health. In 1950, mesothelioma was clearly identified as risk to health, and yet Lang Hancock, CSR, James Hardie directors, thousands of building companies, directors of the building companies, governments and communities ignored this health risk, ignored it for such a long time. And it came to the unions to pressure governments and to Robert and to his organisation to pressure governments to take some action in relation to it. It was the lack of commercial opportunity that caused CSR to wind up its operations, not the health risk. It was the lack of the commercial risk that led James Hardie to exit Australia and hide in the Netherlands and in Ireland, not the occupational health and safety risk to the workers or the consumers. And it is the directors of all those big companies that made money and the workers who suffered from it. So who are the good guys? Well, we know definitely that Robert and Rosemary are amongst the best of the good guys. Professor Bill Musk, Melita and her ongoing activities with this organisation, the society and its staff and supporters, and those unions, of which there are not many, who voice their disapproval and their contempt for the people who are trying to block the proper course of damages and compensation for people who've got these diseases and to block the use of them out there in the community. And there are many other people whom we should acknowledge as having a part in this role, but sadly so many of them have passed away. Governments have a clear responsibility to act, and I regret to say that that the speed of their actions are not always commensurate with their obligation. We introduced asbestos diseases legislation in the first year of our Labor government in 1983. To be honest, if I look back on it, we could have done a lot more, but we thought we were breaking ground. We introduced special provisions in OC health and safety, particularly for those wharfies who'd been loading the asbestos and whose rights and interests had come too late for the ordinary time allowance for some of their damages entitlements. And I am heartened to hear from Melita and also from speaking yesterday with Quigley's office that they're introducing some of the issues to rectify some of the issues that are involved in the obligation to meet damages claims for people who've suffered it. But we are not seeing the legislation for damages for gratuitous services being introduced, and I would invite all of you here today to raise that issue with your local Member of Parliament, raise it with the media, raise it with the union movement, because it is something that is needed to complete the circle and to ensure that justice is done to our community. So the news is not just about Harvey Norman's latest sale. The news is about some good news. The news is about some legislation being introduced this year, but the news is that it's not enough. And I really encourage you to do something about it. And so, to wind up, I would like to repeat my thanks most sincerely to the people that I've known now for many years, Robert and Rose Marie. They have driven this organisation through to the point really beyond belief, without resources and without anything other than a deep and abiding commitment to people who suffer from asbestos-related diseases. And I would like to think that today we're in a position to remember all those people who've passed away and also those who continue to suffer from these diseases, and particularly the people who fought so hard to provide justice in this community for them. Thank you very much.